John Lennon saved a man from 10 years in prison against all odds, New York City, 1973. The air in the courtroom was thick with the scent of old paper, fear, and injustice. John Lennon sat in the public gallery, a dark suit ill-fitting his rebellious spirit, his face grim. He wasn't there for a concert. He wasn't there for an interview. He was there for a man he barely knew. The man on trial was Tommy "the Torch" O'Malley, a small-time Irish immigrant, a dock worker accused of arson and conspiracy. The charges were serious, 10 years in prison at least, maybe more. Tommy was a face in the crowd, one of the many working-class Irish immigrants John had encountered during his years in New York. A quiet man, hard-working, with a family back in County Cork. But Tommy had a secret, a past, and a connection to a shadowy organization that the US government was determined to crush. The IRA, the FBI, under intense pressure to crack down on suspected Irish Republican Army sympathizers in America, had built a case against Tommy. A flimsy case based on circumstantial evidence, coerced testimony, and a pervasive atmosphere of fear. John Lennon, himself a target of the US government's deportation efforts, understood the machinery of injustice. He knew what it felt like to be hunted, to be labeled a threat, to have your life dismantled by unseen forces. He had read about Tommy's case in a small, independent newspaper. The details were sparse, but the injustice was glaring. A man being railroaded, not for what he had done, but for who he was perceived to be. Yoko Ono, ever the pragmatist, had warned him. "John, you're already fighting your own battle. Don't get involved. It's too dangerous." But John couldn't turn away. He saw a reflection of his own struggle in Tommy O'Malley's terrified eyes. A man caught in the crosshairs of a powerful government, facing a decade behind bars for a crime he might not have committed. He felt a moral imperative, a deep-seated belief that if he, John Lennon, with all his fame and resources, couldn't stand up for someone like Tommy, then what was the point of anything? So he walked into that courtroom, a rock star in a sea of lawyers and agents, a beacon of defiance in a system designed to crush the individual. He didn't know how he would do it. He didn't know if he could even make a difference. But John Lennon was about to save a man from 10 years in prison. Against all odds, Tommy O'Malley was a pawn, then a simple man caught in a complex geopolitical game. The US government, eager to maintain good relations with the UK, was cracking down hard on any perceived support for the IRA, even if it was just a whispered sympathy in a pub. Tommy's crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time, with the wrong accent, and a few distant relatives who might have had Republican leanings. The arson charge was a convenient fabrication, a way to make an example of him. His lawyer, a tired public defender named Sarah Jenkins, was overwhelmed. She believed in Tommy's innocence, but she was outmatched. The prosecution had unlimited resources, a narrative they were determined to push, and a judge who seemed predisposed to believe the worst. "They want to make an example of him," Sarah told John during a tense meeting in a courthouse hallway. "They don't care if he's guilty, they just want a conviction." John listened, his mind racing. He understood the tactics, the smear campaigns, the manufactured evidence. He had lived through it himself with the FBI's relentless pursuit of his deportation. "What do you need?" John asked, cutting to the chase. "Money for a start," Sarah admitted. "For private investigators, for expert witnesses, for anything that can counter their narrative, and public attention. This case is being buried. No one cares about a working-class Irishman accused of terrorism. John knew he could provide the money. That was easy. But public attention, that was a double-edged sword. It could draw more scrutiny, more pressure. It could also put him, John Lennon, further in the crosshairs of the government. Yoko's words echoed in his mind. It's too dangerous. But John looked at Sarah, at her weary but determined eyes, and he thought of Tommy, sitting in a cell, his life hanging by a thread. I'll do it, John said, his voice firm. I'll get you the money, and I'll get you the attention. But we have to be smart. We have to hit them where it hurts. The plan began to form. A risky, audacious strategy that would leverage John's fame, not for self-promotion, but for justice. He was about to declare war on the system. Not with songs, not with protests, but with the very tools of the legal system, amplified by the power of his celebrity. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Yet just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. John Lennon's involvement in Tommy O'Malley's case sent shockwaves through the legal and political establishment. The media, initially dismissive, suddenly descended on the courthouse. A Beatle fighting for an alleged IRA sympathizer. It was a headline too juicy to ignore. But John's strategy was precise. He didn't just throw money at the problem. He used his platform to expose the government's tactics. He held impromptu press conferences outside the courthouse, speaking directly to the cameras, not about Tommy's innocence, but about the process, about the right to a fair trial, about the dangers of political persecution. This isn't about whether Tommy O'Malley is a good man or a bad man, John declared to a throng of reporters. This is about whether the American government can railroad an immigrant just because they don't like his politics. If they can do it to Tommy, they can do it to anyone. They can do it to me. His words resonated. They tapped into a growing public distrust of government, especially in the post-Watergate era. Meanwhile, Sarah Jenkins, now with the resources John provided, began to dismantle the prosecution's case, and private investigators uncovered inconsistencies in witness testimonies. Expert fire investigators debunked the arson claims, but the prosecution still had one key piece of evidence, a supposed anonymous tip from a concerned citizen that directly implicated Tommy. It was vague, unsubstantiated, but the judge had allowed it, citing national security concerns. John knew this was the weakest link, the anonymous tip, the classic government tactic to introduce unverified information. He and Sarah devised a daring plan. They would demand the identity of the anonymous tipster. A long shot, but John believed it was their only way to expose the truth. The judge, under immense public pressure, generated by John's media blitz, reluctantly agreed to review the request. And then, the unexpected happened. A low-level FBI agent, unhaunted by the injustice he was witnessing, anonymously leaked a crucial piece of information to Sarah Jenkins. The concerned citizen was not a citizen at all. It was a fabricated informant, a ghost. The government had manufactured evidence. The revelation that the key piece of evidence was fabricated sent the courtroom into a frenzy. Sarah Jenkins, armed with the leaked information, moved to have the entire case dismissed. The prosecution, caught red-handed, scrambled to contain the damage. The judge, now facing a potential scandal of epic proportions, called for a closed-door hearing. John Lennon, sitting in the gallery, watched the drama unfold. He knew this was the moment, the turning point. In the closed hearing, Sarah presented the evidence of the fabricated informant. The prosecution, cornered, tried to argue national security, tried to bury the truth. But the public outcry, fueled by John's relentless media presence, was too loud to ignore. The press, sensing blood, was demanding answers. The judge, a man who valued his reputation above all else, knew he had to act decisively. He ruled that the anonymous tip was inadmissible. He ordered a full investigation into the FBI's conduct. And then he did something even more shocking. He declared a mistrial. The courtroom erupted. Tommy O'Malley, who had sat stoically through weeks of testimony, broke down in tears. Sarah Jenkins, exhausted but triumphant, hugged her client. John Lennon, a quiet smile spreading across his face, felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The government, humiliated, would not give up easily. They would seek a retrial. They would try to rebuild their case. And John knew that his own fight against deportation would intensify. He had poked the bear, and the bear was angry. But for that moment, in that courtroom, justice had prevailed. A small-time immigrant, targeted by the full might of the US government, had been saved. And it was all thanks to a rock star who refused to be silent. The mistrial was a victory, but it came with a heavy cost. The FBI, stung by the public exposure of their tactics, redoubled their efforts against John Lennon. His deportation case, which had been simmering, now boiled over. New charges were brought against Tommy O'Malley, albeit weaker ones. The government was determined to get their conviction, even if it meant dragging the process out indefinitely. And John and Yoko found themselves under even more intense surveillance. Their phones were tapped constantly, their movements tracked. They were living in a virtual police state. "They're trying to scare us, John," Yoko said, her voice weary. "They want us to give up, to go back to England." "Not a chance," John retorted, his defiance hardening. "If we give up now, then everything we fought for, everything Tommy went through, means nothing." The financial strain was immense. Legal fees mounted, security costs soared. John's music career, already in flux, was further complicated by the constant legal battles. He channeled his anger, his frustration, his fear into his art. He wrote new songs, even more politically charged, more defiant. He used his music as a weapon, a shield, a voice for the voiceless. He knew he was risking everything. When his freedom, his family, his very life in America. But he couldn't back down. Not now. Not when he had seen the face of injustice up close. Tommy O'Malley, out on bail, was a broken man. The constant threat of prison, the relentless scrutiny, had taken its toll. He was grateful to John, but he was also terrified. "Mr. Lennon," Tommy pleaded one day, "maybe it's better if I just plead guilty. Take the lesser sentence. Get it over with. This is destroying my family." John looked at him, his heart aching. He saw the fear, the exhaustion, but he also saw the flicker of hope he had ignited. "No, Tommy," John said, his voice firm. "We don't give up. Not now, not ever. We fight them. We expose them. We show them that they can't break us." The darkest moment had arrived. The government's pressure was relentless, and the personal cost was immense. John Lennon, the man who had once sung about peace and love, was now locked in a brutal, uncompromising war. And he was fighting it, not just for himself, but for a man he barely knew, a man who represented all the forgotten, all the oppressed, all the victims of a system that valued power over justice. The tide began to turn, not through legal maneuvering, but through an unexpected ally, a young, idealistic journalist from the New York Times. Inspired by John's public stance and Sarah Jenkins's tireless work, began to dig deeper into the government's campaign against Irish immigrants. He uncovered a pattern of abuse, fabricated evidence, coerced confessions, a systematic effort to target and deport individuals based on flimsy pretexts. His investigative reports, published in the New York Times, exposed the full extent of the government's overreach. They revealed that Tommy O'Malley was not an isolated case, but part of a larger, politically motivated witch hunt. The public outcry was immense. Civil liberties organizations joined the fight. Politicians, sensing a shift in public opinion, began to distance themselves from the government's aggressive tactics. The pressure on the prosecution to drop the charges against Tommy O'Malley became unbearable. They had lost the public. They had lost the moral high ground. Finally, after months of relentless legal and public pressure, the government capitulated. They dropped all charges against Tommy O'Malley. He was a free man. The news spread like wildfire. Tommy, overwhelmed with relief, hugged Sarah Jenkins, tears streaming down his face. John Lennon, sitting in his Dakota apartment, heard the news on the radio. He closed his eyes, a profound sense of exhaustion and triumph washing over him. He had done it. He had saved a man from 10 years in prison. Against all odds, his own deportation battle would continue for several more years. But the victory in Tommy's case had a ripple effect. It exposed the government's tactics, weakened their credibility, and ultimately contributed to John's eventual victory in his own immigration fight. Tommy O'Malley, a free man, returned to his family in County Cork. He never forgot John Lennon. He never forgot the man who, against all advice, against all danger, had stood up for him when no one else would. John Lennon had risked everything: his reputation, his freedom, his family's safety, and he had won. Not with a song, but with a relentless pursuit of justice. Tommy O'Malley lived a quiet life in Ireland, a free man, forever grateful to the rock star who had saved him. He never sought fame, never spoke publicly about his ordeal, preferring to live out his days in peace. Sarah Jenkins went on to become a celebrated civil rights lawyer, inspired by the courage of John Lennon and the resilience of Tommy O'Malley. John Lennon finally won his own immigration battle in 1976, granted permanent residency in the US. He would go on to have his son, Sean, and find a period of domestic peace before his tragic death in 1980. The full story of John Lennon's intervention in Tommy O'Malley's case remains largely untold in official biographies. It was a quiet act of defiance, overshadowed by his more public battles and his musical legacy. But for those who knew, it was a testament to the true heart of John Lennon, the man who, despite his own struggles, despite the immense personal risk, chose to stand up for a stranger. The artist who understood that true freedom wasn't just about singing about peace, but about fighting for justice. He saved a man from 10 years in prison against all odds, and in doing so, he proved that fame, when wielded with courage and conviction, could be a powerful force for good. He showed us that even against the might of a powerful government, one voice, amplified by truth and compassion, can make a difference. The echoes of Tommy O'Malley's freedom and John Lennon's unwavering fight still resonate today, a reminder that justice is not always given. It must be fought for, And sometimes, the most unlikely heroes emerge from the shadows to lead the charge. The court transcripts from Tommy O'Malley's trial are locked away in government archives, a forgotten chapter of injustice averted. But the story lives on, a whisper of courage, a testament to the power of one man's belief in justice, and the enduring legacy of John Lennon, the rebel who saved a man from prison. The end. If this story about courage, justice, and the power of standing up for the oppressed moved you, subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that even in the darkest shadows, truth can find a way to emerge. What historical moment made you realize the profound impact of a single voice against a system? Tell us in the comments below.